project was designed from the beginning to be malleable, so that new information, if we have to make a correction, we'd be able to take any node and all the daughters of that node and move them all together to a new location if need be. It had to be completely reparable in that sense, because although Arizona Tree of Life Project was a noble cause, and I do it as a brilliant site, and it's very informative and educational, it needed to be updated and corrected on a number of different points right away. Like, as soon as it went online, there was so many things that were almost immediately discovered that needed further revision or correction. There was some things, and I did a video about this called the Phylogeny Explorer, where I talked about how the Arizona Tree of Life was this wonderful endeavor, but within the first 2 to 5 years of it coming out, we found that this, and this other thing all needed to be corrected or revised or restructured, and there's no way to do that with the Arizona Tree of Life project. There's no way to make those necessary corrections. So, and there's a lot of things that site doesn't account for. So there's whole extinct groups that aren't mentioned there at all. And we're trying to cover every fossil species, as well as every extant species, but the priority right now is to do every fossil species first. There are taxonomy sites that are covering extant species or recently extinct, very recently extinct species, but nobody's covering the fossil stuff. And then there's another website that's dedicated only to fossils, and that has needed significant revision for quite a long time. It's a peer-reviewed site. It's one that paleontologists regularly use, and it even has little cladograms inside of it. You can only ever see a snippet of it at a time. You can't ever expand out to see the big picture. And as I said, there's a lot of things missing. There are some things that my personal experience going through this and working these sites is I found a number of things that were duplicated. Nothing's perfect. But in a computerized system, there shouldn't be any duplications like this. We're talking about websites that were built by hand, and we want to take it out of that so that it's completely objective.
Take the human element out. Absolutely.
Yeah. We want to have some interface, and so there's some value in the different types of presentation that it can produce, and not just dark screen or light screen, but different types of depth of perception or of imagery, whether we just want to see a certain capacity of it and be able to take a snapshot of that, which is the kind of thing that you would see either on the Arizona Tree of Life Project or on Wikipedia very often. We want to be able to see if we can just take snippets of those branches just for illustrative purposes without separating them from the mass. And it is really, really massive.
Yeah.
It's funny how people, nobody has an idea how big the Tree of Life is. When all the representations that you ever see, all the little renderings, if you're going to try to put it into a single picture, there's no way.
It's unfathomable. It's how many stars are there in the sky kind of situation with that. I always bring up, especially with creation being the opposition. Coleoptera, the beetle clade. The beetle clade, so many. That would be basically the largest clade that's placed at the order level of all the animal kingdom. I mean, there's so many represented species that I could spend all my days inputting one species at a time into a database and not even scratch the surface. So this software that they're talking about working on in the Phylogeny Explorer project and the next phase, this evolution of the project itself is fantastic news for situations like that, because human input is going to be rife with errors. It's going to be slow. It's going to be tedious, and we're going to have to roll back and backtrack and go back over the steps we've already taken.
Yeah, and this site was designed that any correction, any revision, new information, new discoveries can be added or new alterations made as necessary without any great issue.
It's easily editable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Not edible. I got him laughing at me for saying edible.
You need it.
Yeah. So Let me ask. I know that when you did your feline video and we had the graphic that people really enjoyed, and you're like, yeah, this is something that. When did you decide that was actually something that was within grasp? I know that we're still reaching for it, but I think it's within grasp.
Yeah, it was. I got the idea to do mine pretty much immediately when Arizona Tree of Life Project lost funding. Right away.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't what they had done looked nice, but it wasn't big enough. It didn't cover enough. There was an awful lot missing. There was just not just individual species missing. I mean, the parent categories, huge parent categories, were missing, and so there was a lot of things. You want to click through that, and you want to see what these other things are, and you can't because most of the links were never included. They're just not in there at all, and so. I realized that we needed something that was cost effective so that it wouldn't run out of financing the way that project did. They could also be as educational as this was and presentable as, and then the problem that we have with mine is that it's not as easy to look at in small steps.
Right.
It's voluminous and enormous, and you can jump into the middle of it, but it's kind of like mapping synapses through the brain. Where are you? You're just in the middle somewhere.
There are a lot of numbered clades listed on there right now that it's not that we don't know, it's that they just don't have names yet. Just
among the named clades, if you look at the Linnaean taxonomy, which is what most people know, the family, genus, or what is it, kingdom, phylum, class, family, genus, species, and so forth. Mm-hmm. That's like 7 ranks, and then they added domain. Like when I was in school the first time, 25 years ago, I guess. They added domain, so there was an 8th one. But there are minimum 70 named clades just in human ancestry.
Right.
So it's already 10 times that. And that's just the ones with names. We don't have names for the ones we don't have names for.
And every one of those 7 has subfamily or superfamily. There's
That's because they tried to keep the Linnaean system, and they tried to make it operable, but they just can't. The Linnaean taxonomy. Linnaeus was a creationist. He had no idea that evolution was possible. He drew up this. He realized there's this branching tree pattern in how you classify organisms, but he couldn't figure out why that was. And so his system does not account for evolution. Doesn't allow for it. And so that's why we're trying to make subfamilies and super orders and infraclass and all these little extra divisions, and to realize the structure that you're trying to save isn't worth saving.
Yeah, beyond.
So we can use the names that were already applied to the family, genus, and species. We can use
But the binomial nomenclature. Let's keep the species and genus. Yeah, and then.
Well, we're not even keeping that because very often we go to trinomial now.
Oh. Go on.
Yeah, so that's not even canon anymore. But we would use, let's say, order and genus and class and family as signposts, just to help keep us from getting lost.
Like pins in a gradient. Yeah, just sticking a pin in a gradient, saying, yeah.
So this is what we used to call an order. And here's all these other things that precede it and stem from it and so forth. And so it's not quite the unfathomable maze that it otherwise would have been.
Right. And genetically speaking, those classifications, that's what it is. They're just sticking a pin saying everything within this circle, we're going to call this order, but it's on a gradient. There's so much variable between what designates within this genus for this grouping, but compared to what's within this genus for this group, and especially when you look at like arthropods, which is what I spend a lot of time looking at, and then you look at like tetrapods and mammals, for instance. What we decide this constitutes a different genus in that grouping and mammal grouping, we might say, oh, this is just a different species for. Beetles, for instance. So it's really kind of there's some margin for error there that, like you were talking about, having it done by automation, having a computer go through and confirm what we're looking at, that might give us better clades. more.
Well, there's also different ways of rendering this in a number of other groups. I think there's like a half a dozen different attempts to show any degree of taxonomy. Most of them don't have any fossil species on them at all. One only has fossil species, nothing extant. But there's different ways that each of these different groups depict these. And some of them can be quite brilliant artistic renderings, but they're not really educational or informative. It's a wonderful thing to look at, but it doesn't explain why it's that way.